every Sunday when we take communion as a congregation, we teach part of the Catechism. So Martin Luther's Small Catechism is a resource that he put together in order to teach the Christian faith. And if you understand the Small Catechism, you basically understand everything there is to know about Christianity. You're not going to know every nuance of every single verse, but you're going to know everything that you need to know in order to be a Christian. And so we go back to the Catechism again and again to make sure that we have the foundations of Christianity. And since we've been doing the online church thing and we've had to adjust a number of times, we haven't been able to record me teaching the Catechism for our communion services. So I figured I would put those online here from my basement office. So what we're doing now as we teach the Catechism is we're going into the 10 Commandments. And I think we need to understand what the 10 Commandments are, what they aren't, and how we use them in the New Testament. Because very often they're forced into a box in North American Christianity that they really weren't meant to occupy. So this is an introduction to the 10 Commandments. The first thing we need to understand about the 10 Commandments is that we are not bound to them anymore. You should have seen the look on the faces of my students when I was teaching in high school, and I said, you do not need to follow the 10 Commandments. And that's true. You've been redeemed by Jesus. He has fulfilled the law in your place. There is nothing left to do for your salvation. The gospel is so all-encompassing that there is literally nothing you can do for your salvation. In fact, to try to do anything for your salvation, to be a good person in order to somehow earn something from God because of some obligation you've drummed up in your own head, Paul would say in Galatians, that literally cuts you off from the grace that you love so much. So to be very clear, we do not have to do the 10 Commandments. So why do we have them? Well, the old Lutheran theologians used 3 terms to describe what the 10 Commandments can and should do in the life of a Christian. And so that's probably a good place to start. The first use or mode or function, if you want to call it that, of the law is to act sort of like a curb on a road. So if you're driving down a road and there's a curb on the side of the road, you know, first of all, where the road is going to continue to go so you can drive down it. You also know that running up against the curb is going to be relatively uncomfortable, and any driving you do after you've gone over the curb is going to be less efficient. In the same way, the 10 Commandments act that way. Imagine with me for a second that you were walking along and you found a plastic tube in which there were some blueprints for a building that you had never seen before. So you asked some people what if they recognized this building, and they said, yes, that building was built at one point but has since been destroyed. So you have the plans to this building, you know what it's supposed to look like, but it's not there anymore. The same thing is true with life on earth. God made it to work a certain way, but sin corrupted it. Sin messed up everything. Sin destroyed the way life was supposed to be in God's perfect creation, and yet God lets us hold on to the 10 Commandments as the blueprints, the way that life is supposed to be, the curb, if you will, that says if you generally drive down this road, you're going to live in line with the way things are meant to work. You're going to go down the smoothest path. Now, of course, that's not perfect. If you would follow the 10 Commandments perfectly, your life wouldn't be perfect because everyone else is on this earth and they're not following the 10 Commandments, and of course, neither are you. But the point is to say, it is just good for humanity to have these blueprints that remind us life is going to work a certain way. And not just because we want it to work that way, it's just always going to work that way. So, Jesus says to Paul, it's hard to kick against the goads. In other words, it's hard to go against what God is doing. We would even say it's impossible. No matter how hard sinful natures try to break the world, try to change the definition of all sorts of things, ultimately it cannot completely break God's creation. The curbs will always be there. Living contrary to the curbs will always be an inefficient way of living. So that's the first way, mode, function. The second is like a mirror. So when you look in the mirror, you see a face. Hopefully not my face, because I have this terrible mustache on my face, which is probably what you're thinking right now. But when you look in the mirror, you see who you really are. There's no hiding from a mirror. You can hide with photo filters or good lighting, but when it comes to a mirror, there's nothing that you can hide. The Bible uses the 10 Commandments the same way. It lines you up next to the 10 Commandments and says, how you doing? Are you keeping the 10 Commandments? Are you always respecting authority? Are you honoring God above all things? Are you finding His word to be the most important thing in your life? Have you taken care of your body? Have you taken care of God's gift of marriage? Have you seen other people's things as good for them and blessings for them? Have you received everything you got with thankfulness? The Ten Commandments are the mirror to which we compare our lives, and we find ourselves wanting. And that's a really good thing, because that sets us up for the gospel, of course. It's what every sermon should do. Every sermon should show you where you have fallen short of the glory of God so that you can be justified freely by God's grace through faith. Not because you kept some standard, because frankly you're not even close. But there is a third function or use or mode of the law, and that's to guide the Christian as they live. Remember, I said you don't have to follow the Ten Commandments, and that's absolutely true. But if you don't have to follow the Ten Commandments, and you don't want to sin, what are you going to do? Well, that's where the Ten Commandments would stand up and say, well, you could try to follow us. Not because you're going to earn anything, but because, well, remember, it's a curb. It works. It's a better way to live. And so use the Ten Commandments as a guide. Use them as the way to figure out what you're going to do with your life now that you've been fully redeemed, paid for in Jesus, completely finished in his death and resurrection. Well, now that you're free, you might as well worship God, like all the time. I mean, he's the guy who did this all for you. And you should respect authority, because God implemented authority. God in and of himself is authority. You should take care of your body, because that God who redeemed you from death is going to resurrect that body. You should honor God's gift of marriage, if for no other reason than to be a blessing to your spouse. And so on from there. Use him as a guide. This is how you ought to live. Not because you have to, because you're redeemed. You're free. You're forgiven. Now, we're going to focus on all different ways that we use the law, but it's always good to remember those things as we go through the Ten Commandments. So I look forward to studying them with you as we continue our Teaching the Catechism series. We'll catch you next time.